Hey guys, it's Jenn. I am doing Paralyzer today, also featuring Gandalf, who will not get out of my lap. So I apologize any stops in reading here as I get attacked by cats, but cat owners may understand here. The interesting thing about Paralyzer is when I was originally creating the book, like I said, it was all just interconnected stories. I had no concept of that Silas Hawthorne was going to become a main focus. This is actually the first time we see Silas, and it's very open ended. That was one of the complaints I actually had from some people that did some early reading of it in the Discord. That especially my friend Nikolai really, really liked the character of Silas, and then it was like, but what happens? You left it open ended. Is he alive? He needs to be alive. I love him and Emily, and it's like, okay, so I didn't know till later on, uh, when I was getting into one of the final stories of this book, that it made sense to, since Silas was a storyteller, to be these were all the stories that were told to him. So, excuse me, it is very, very hot. Uh, but Paralyzer was written in a tone where we didn't know this about Silas yet. So some of the things have been, I wouldn't say retrofitted, but have definitely changed about the situation since this story. Anyway, without further ado, Paralyzer. Oh, one more note I want to make here. The woods, if you want to research Rubio Woods and all of that, when I lived in Chicagoland, if you know anything about the famous Bachelor's Grove Cemetery, that is actually what Rubio Woods is written about here. That is the actual name of the trail system and the forest preserve right there that you have to go through to get to the cemetery. Excuse me. I spent a lot of time there growing up. It was one of my favorite places to just walk around. My friends and I have done some, tried to do ghost hunting. I think I have an EVP possible from there. I'm not really sure. A friend of mine had a tree branch fall on them the one time. So we're not saying that's related at all, but that was a thing that happened. But yeah, if you I next time I'm back in Chicago, I would love to do a walkthrough on TikTok there for you guys. But yeah, if you know anything, you're ever in that area or you're looking for some great, ghost stories to look into the lore of Bachelor's Grove Cemetery. So, anyway, Paralyzer. The eastward facing windows were the last hope of light for the tomb gray silent house. The dark wood exterior had already. Sorry. I'm not going to start this again, so I'm just going to start again here. I have a cat like scratching himself in front of me, distracting me. The eastward facing windows were the last hope for light in the tomb's silent gray house, its dark wood exterior already ominous as what lay outside the deep woods of Selene Falls. As the orangish light retracted, the large trees that shaded the long circular driveway looked ablaze. Silas Hawthorne hated to be afraid of what was in the dark. The old floorboards sounded like ship planks as he hobbled to his bedroom on the second floor. Rent a creepy house to act as inspiration, they say. It'll help your writing, they say. He pushed a dark strand of his dark hair. Sorry, he pushed a strand of his dark hair behind his ears. He pounded up the stairs, each board groaning as if the small man were about to break through. My publisher doesn't have to be here alone in this shithole, does he? Silas had a bad habit of talking to himself. Maybe it was the loneliness that always plagued him since he was a small child that no one played with. He was an odd duck, Silas knew, always favoring reading over toys, world building inside his own brain as he created masterpieces instead of talking to the actual inhabitants of the realm where his physical form remained. In his head, he wasn't Silas the psycho. Kids could be cruel in a school system that took no stance on bullying crueler. Who was laughing now? A published author is laughable. Any moron with access to the internet could scribble a few meager words into a blog site and self publish these days with access to Wi Fi. Silas liked to believe he created art. The last dying light slipping away, the top of the staircase totally blackened. Silas hadn't been there long enough to memorize all the light switch locations. He reached into his back pocket and fumbled for the phone. He used as his torch. 3 doors, 2 small bedrooms, one full bath stood ajar. Silas was very sure he hadn't let them open. Autumn leaves crunched under the black hiking boots on the small trail. In the distance, branches snapped. Her ears alerted to the sound. Deep breath, measuring in heartbeats, then nothing. Emily Hawthorne shook off her anxiety like a cold blanket. She could do this. Her skull print backpack heavy against her shoulders, she readjusted, trying to not jolt her camera too much. Technically, you were allowed in Rubio Woods until sunset. The moments slipping away, the longer she stood on the graveled path, afraid every noise was a coyote. Her strange husband always told her how ridiculous her fear was about predators. The only true danger in the woods was humans themselves. Emily straightened herself and began to walk, her boots slapping rhythmically a tune as she remained hearing earlier in the car ride over. What she would give now to use her AirPods, but it wasn't safe with her back turned on the empty trail. She hadn't seen another person in a long time in the mile trek, which for this area was odd, given the ever present lurking of police officers trying to scoop up troublemakers and wannabe Satanists from the old cemetery. It was one of her favorite places, as strange as it may sound to those outside the alternative persuasion. Centuries before, cemetery picnics were commonplace. Photos of headstones peeked from the mounds of green grass in brilliant light of the sun. Not everyone shared her affection, Emily knew. Ever since the fire back in 1861, the energy of the place had changed, and the legends say many of the plots were left unsold according to record, with a few tombs that were still occupied, chipped and crumbling, the old wire fence falling in on 3 sides as the place fell into disrepair. Emily's photographs of the old cemetery were the most popular draw of the prints she sold on her website. Fans and photographers alike, each with their queries of what light box she was using to produce the bluest glows, or how she got the shadows to fall as they did. How did she create those images that looked like human shapes in the tree line? Selene Falls had graced herself in Emily's works. The door definitely wasn't open, Silas decided. The smallest bedroom he only opened to access what what was in the small space. Deciding upon its lack of a desk, it didn't seem a favorable place for him to write. The only bathroom was on the top floor. Silas had been inside it long enough to take a shower the last night, draining every drop of warmth from the old space heater. A creature of few luxuries, superstitious to his core, it made him a great horror writer. He knew he'd never leave a doorway open. He spun enough tired tropes. He strained his eyes to see if the salt lines were broken. Something felt off. A tapping, as if someone gently rapping. His lungs seized their movement. "Hello?" he whispered softly, hoping for one moment to fade into the nothingness. A tapping, a creature inside, and nothing more. Silas took a step back, fortunately measuring the distance between his creepers and the lip of the step before taking a knee. "Hello?" He knew it was a terrible idea to call out anything that would answer him. Stop it, he willed his brain. The old house was silent, open as the tomb. Penetrating the old fence through a small gap just large enough to admit someone of the size of a small child, Emily was thankful for her stature for once. She slipped the bag inside first, pulling herself through the gap, trying not to catch the collar of her painted bomber jacket. She pushed herself to her feet, familiarity her friend in finding the step among the down tree branches. She found a flat headstone she used as a work table and started to unload her bag. Now it was too dark to see, but the small pocket flashlight would help her until she set up her perimeter of lights. Her strange husband would always complain about how long it took her to get ready. Time and time again, she stressed her art was visual and took preparation, unlike the methods of just soaking it in and regurgitating it with clacking fingertips into a MacBook. It was one good between them once, the fleeting memory of most days. Art scroll weirdos that became allies, then more. The silken sad unraveling that became was the beginning of the end. Perched on a high branch sounded a raven, his call welcoming. The cold days began to set into Emily's bones. Sorry. One of the few sets of only a few sets of the southern side today, then back home before the police would be out and ticketing. From the darkness, a blue flash, marble like, then another pinprick along the tree line. Someone said Selene Falls had magic. Emily believed it was a curse. When lifting at the strands of her hair, she grabbed at her camera. Thump, thump, like the beating of a telltale heart, rhythmic. On the ground floor, something moving. Silas reached into his pocket for a small vial he always kept of holy water from a nearby church, although he didn't believe in the practice, just the magical properties. Thump, thump, something nearer. Upstairs, something stirred in the larger of the two bedrooms, the one where Silas had laid his weary head. He wished not to be alone. He slowly shifted, trying to peer down the stairs, not leaving himself vulnerable to attack on the stairs landing. The moist blackness of the darkness downstairs, his eyes strained. A slow death rattle escaped from the upstairs in one of the rooms. Silas froze. He had never been able to see them, but he felt them all around. They begged for their stories to be heard. He, their slave from a small child, a silent scribe. The whispers of a hoarse voice scratched at his brain, and he scribbled, and the voices of the dead filling his college-lined notebooks. Silas the psycho, schizophrenia, they tried to claim the stories as their own tribute. But alas, he knew the truth. His readers knew the truth. They were real. They were real, and they were coming back to tell him awful things. Their images translated into yet another paperback. He was afraid to even proof. Silas said nothing at the editor's praise, instead collecting the checks and just waiting for another transmission. The publishing house, he thought, moving him to another location would help inspire. What they didn't know was he was a beacon, and moving caused more for them to come. His estranged wife knew she once his safety in the darkness. When they would creep to their bedside and stare, he would often freeze in their gaze, his chest tight as the tiny crimson balloon of his heart was about to burst, his eyes wide, his mouth agape, no sounds escaping. She slumbered peacefully beside him, not once molested. They would grow closer, those fleshless fingers sliding up his arm, taking him roughly by the shoulders and dipping his head as they tried to avert his gaze. Sleep paralysis, the doctors told him. The stories truffined into his skull. He screaming in silent agony while she slept beside him, as peaceful as death itself. Through the true lines, the shapes moved. Emily snapped a few shots. The famed picture of the mist that formed the body of a young man holding a smaller shape of a child is taken here. She wished for her, with all her soul, it had been her camera that had captured the shot and given the small Selene Falls cemetery its glory. The Shadow People series was Emily's best-selling and one she was most proud to work on. In this place in Rubia Woods, they were everywhere. Sorry, I need a drink here. Okay. A rattle near the fence drew her attention. She raised her camera again, a small grimace in the darkness. She never tried to make contact with any of them. It was enough for her that they appeared. She knew what in making contact with them had brought. It was hard for her to believe that her strange husband was actually crazy, like people said. Everyone calling it sickness, when to her it wasn't correct. She believed, like he, they came for him, forced themselves upon him, each interaction pulling him further to the other side. They had been happy once. There wasn't much left of him anymore. Charms around the house to keep them at bay, brick dust in doorways, salt lines inside the rooms. The shell that was once the body of the man she loved, now reduced to a hollow spirit box. He isn't real anymore. They weren't real anymore. The hardest decision to move on. The branch snapped. Emily's camera raised. The godlight of the flash. Another tortured face from hell. Leave me alone, Silas shouted. His voice was no more than a soft plea in his ears. Go away. Please go away. The salt lines doing nothing to keep from what was in the upstairs room from emerging, drawing closer, wisps of white, elongated limbs like spider legs popping through the door, scratching at the walls, the crumbling of the dry wall falling like snowflakes. Presently his soul grew stronger. Silas jumped back. Upstairs, the most ever-present danger. He braved the narrow staircase, his limbs heavy as he stomped, as if stomping through quicksand. On the bottom step he paused for a moment that could be missed in a blink. The steady thump seemed far away. He raced towards the front door, only to be greeted with another shape out of the darkness. He glanced nervously. The chain to the ceiling fan whirled in a tired cyclone above his head, his fingers nervously yanking hard to dislodge the item. With a pop, filled the small space in the eerie, cat-like luster. Long tendrils, I can't read, pushing at him, sharp like shards, penetrating his flesh as it snaked up his arm. Al- Above him, the clamor, the monster's coming, his last hope. He reached inside his pocket and threw the veil of holy water down at his feet. Above him, the clamor, the monster's coming. It was the first time she had seen him. They were 17, in a spot where all time and space had ceased. It had been too much. She knew it from memory. He weakened from years, desperate from last resource, fistfuls of anguish gravel, expelling the windows of the small farmhouse that remained in ruins of Rubio Woods. She alerted every small explosion of crystal knot. She ran to him, the pale young man with the bluest eyes, tears sparkling down his cheeks, the smell of copper. She pulled him close. He finally relented, melting into her embrace. Their eyes met. She said nothing, a tributary of crimson soaking into the cuffs of his hoodie. There was nothingness. Emily flipped through her camera, hoping her shots were good enough for the night. She hated being out there so late. She repacked her bags, taking up the last of her lights, moving through the fence, then again, down the path where she remembered the car being. The most significant day, how strange this manifests. What should have been his last, this night that was all too much to take. Silas had parked the car, taken a run down the path in the familiar wooded trails of Selene Falls' heart of darkness. The old farmhouse seemed a far enough place to get reprieve when it was all slipping away. Her face, unlike the others, her lips saying nothing. Spared? Or was he? Emily moved down the path, the faces creeping out of the darkness of the woods. They didn't need to infect her like they did Silas. The moment they had become one, she the other half of his soul, her name ingrained on every fiber of his weakened being, she was able to follow him anywhere. Silas thought that she should be the ward he needed, the secret Horcrux to finally keep the monsters at bay. They never stopped coming. Their tales needed telling, and he had a talented tongue. Emily knew the car was down near 143rd Street. She revisited this walk so many times in her memory, but Silas never came. An explosion of pain behind his ocean eyes, they pushed their latest narrative into the meats of his skull. Silas felt tears sliding down his cheeks. Like a child cornered again, Silas the psycho, haunted by voices, the things they called hallucinations and he called ghosts. Emily was the only one to never heard him, and she now too rejected him because he was too far gone. Unable to move, he felt the text inserted, his assignment delivered. He dumped back violently on the floor, feeling returning. Pain beat a foul discourse across his skin. The publishers had given him 2 months to get the new manuscript in order. He didn't want his task. Maddening nights of translating tortured tales to make this deadline. How he wished for the presence of Emily to appear, to revive whatever goodness was still left in him. She didn't know how many times she walked this road, only to recall that Emily lived in an echo. Fingers battered, broken, slammed against the alabaster white of keys, 12-point Calibri. Silas screamed to no one, frozen in place until his duty was met. Now, again, reading that, one of the things that really comes to mind about that was remembering that I explained later, these were the stories that Silas was telling. Because that is a question I've gotten before from readers, that the inconsistency between what we find out later with Emily and, here making it sound like a strange husband, like they had actually been together. This was Silas's telling of this story. So there's two things to remember that I kind of put in to make it kind of retrofit. Is one, this is how he presented this story in the book. So there could be fictionalized detail to that, if that makes any sense. And number two of that is just the fact that he believed, as you'll find out later in other parts of this book and definitely in Requiem, that he believed this fallacy of the life with Emily. And one of the things that I did kind of retrofit a little bit is that Emily living in this echo, believing this, was again Silas's interpretation. She always knew, and that's really going to be, a thing that kind of divides them later on. uh I'm going to definitely do, at least I know two more stories from this book. I believe the next one I'm going to do is Devotion, which is again a very long one, a very sad one, but it is one of my absolute favorites. And until I did the coupling of Silas and Avery, this other couple was absolutely my favorite uh, two characters that not only have only written for this collection, but I think that I've written for anything. So look forward to that. Thanks for tuning in. Sorry about all the weird pauses. It's 95 degrees outside, so I am dying in here without multiple fans going. All the cats are grouped around me because I have the fans pointing up here, so we made do. So, all right, thanks for tuning in. See you next time.